It was the cat's eyes that stopped me, not their color or how wide they were. It was the way they looked right through my grief, like it wasn't invisible after all. October 18th, 7:42 a.m. Fog clung to the ground like it had nowhere else to be. The air had that stillness you only get in the earliest stretch of autumn, like the earth was holding its breath between seasons. One last hush before winter swallowed the world whole. The leaves hadn't fully turned yet, but the ones that had looked tired, burnt at the edges, a kind of beauty that came after too much sun, too much wind, too much time. That morning, I parked on the side of County Road 14, next to a field that used to be corn. The stalks had been harvested, but the ground was still uneven and smelled faintly of mud and something old, like burlap and rain. I wasn't supposed to be there. I was supposed to be in Chicago, sitting through a final mediation meeting with my ex-husband's lawyer, smiling politely, agreeing to things I didn't want, signing away what used to be ours. But instead, I'd driven 3 hours north with no bag, no plan, and no real idea where I was going. Just away, just out of reach. I ended up pulling over here, in front of this nothing field, because my hands were shaking too badly to keep going. I didn't expect to cry, but I did. I cried so hard I scared myself. And when it finally passed, when the sobs turned into the kind of silence that rings in your ears, I leaned my head against the steering wheel and whispered, "I don't know what I'm doing anymore." That's when I saw her. A blur of movement in my peripheral vision, small, low to the ground. She darted between the broken wooden posts of the fence and crouched there, half hidden by fog and distance. A cat. Not a kitten, not quite, but not full-grown either. She had that lanky, unfinished look. Her fur was mottled, a patchwork of dark gray and ginger, almost storm-colored. From where I sat, she looked soaked, but it hadn't rained. She didn't move toward me, just stood there, still, watching. I watched back. For some reason, that made sense. I should tell you, I wasn't a cat person. Not in a cruel way. I never disliked them. I just didn't grow up with pets. My parents were allergic. My husband hated fur. My apartment didn't allow them. Cats were things other people got to love. And after everything that had happened in the last year, I wasn't in the business of opening my heart to anything fragile. It felt safer that way. Cleaner. But there was something in this cat stillness that pulled me. Something that said, I see it too. Whatever it was. When I opened the car door, she didn't bolt. She just sat down, calm as anything, tail tucked, chest lifted, waiting. The ground was cold beneath my shoes as I crossed the ditch and stepped into the field. Fog closed in around my calves like smoke. The world got smaller, quieter, like it was just me and her. I stopped, maybe 10 feet from her. "Hi," I said. She blinked slowly. That was all. I squatted down to her level, careful not to get too close. I didn't know if she'd run, or hiss, or scratch, but she didn't move. "I don't have anything for you," I said. "No food, no treats, just me." Another blink. But this time, she tilted her head. Just a little. It felt like a question, or maybe an answer. I stayed with her for a long time. I don't know how long exactly. Long enough for the fog to start lifting. Long enough for the cold to bite my fingers. Long enough to forget, for a few seconds at a time, what I was running from. Then, she stood. Not in a sudden, jarring way, just rose. And began walking. Not away from me, not toward the woods, toward the barn. I hadn't noticed it before. The fog had hidden it. But now I could see the sloped roof rising out of the mist, peeling red paint, A broken window. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. She glanced over her shoulder once. I swear to God, it felt like she was waiting for me. I followed. I didn't tell myself why. There was no logic to it. I was a 36-year-old woman following a stray cat into a crumbling barn on a back road in Wisconsin, but it felt right. Not safe, exactly, but necessary. The kind of necessary your body knows before your brain catches up. The kind of necessary you only feel when you've lost too much. The barn door was slightly ajar. She slipped through like smoke. I had to push it wider to follow. It groaned. The smell hit me first. Damp wood, old hay, and something faintly sweet. Not rotten, not fresh, just forgotten. The kind of smell that settles into your clothes. Light poured in through holes in the roof, catching dust motes in midair like snow suspended in time. The cat was already halfway across the floor, picking her way between the boards like she knew which ones would hold. She stopped near the far corner and sat again, just like she had in the field, waiting. I didn't see anything strange, not at first, just an old workbench, some rusted tools, a pile of blankets, curled into something like a nest, a milk crate tipped on its side. But there was something in the air, like memory, or silence with weight. My heart began to pound. I looked at the cat. She stared back. Her eyes weren't afraid. They were steady. And for the first time in months, I felt something shift inside me. Not a dramatic change, not some sudden epiphany, just a tiny click, like the smallest part of a lock beginning to turn. I stepped forward. The cat didn't move. She just kept her eyes on me. Still, quiet, like she'd brought me exactly where I needed to be. And I didn't know it yet. But this moment, standing in the middle of a barn with a stray cat and nothing left to lose, was the beginning of something that would change me completely. Not loudly, not all at once, but like the season changes, quiet, unstoppable, one falling leaf at a time. The first time she touched me, it was barely a touch at all, just a brush of fur across my ankle, but somehow it felt more intimate than the hugs I'd been forcing myself to accept for months. Inside the barn, the silence felt thick enough to hold shape. Dust floated like memory. Light moved slow, golden and angled, coming through the cracks in the roof and the slats in the walls. It painted everything in soft amber, even the cat. She wasn't looking at me anymore. Instead, she padded silently over to the old pile of fabric near the wall, not exactly blankets, more like old horse rugs or feed sacks layered and pressed into something nest-like. She circled once, kneaded it with her paws, then curled into a crescent. Chest rising, falling. It was like I wasn't even there. Like she'd brought me to this place, and now that I was here, her job was done. But I didn't leave. I sat down slowly, legs folded beneath me, on a low, broken beam. It let out a groan beneath my weight, but held. The air was cool inside, but not cold. I tucked my sleeves over my hands and stared at the cat, feeling that familiar throb in my chest. I hadn't planned to stay long, but I couldn't make myself go. She slept for nearly an hour, maybe more. During that time, I watched her the way you'd watch a tide roll in. No urgency, no expectations, just presence. I noticed the faint twitch of her ear when a bird landed on the roof, the ripple of her flank when she dreamed, the slow, steady rhythm of her breath. There was something about the sound of it, her breathing, that anchored me, made me feel like I still had a pulse. At one point she stirred, uncurled, stretched long, tail high, paws forward, and then, without looking at me, she walked over. Her gait was silent, deliberate. She brushed lightly past my shin, The warmth of her side met the cold denim of my jeans. Just a second of contact, then gone. I held my breath the whole time. That night, I slept in the car, parked a few hundred feet from the barn. I hadn't meant to. I'd told myself I was only resting my eyes, just for a minute. But I woke up at 3:12 a.m. with the windows fogged and my neck stiff. The cat hadn't followed me when I left the barn. I told myself I was fine with that, but I dreamt about her anyway. The next morning, I went back. I still don't know why. Not really. There were a dozen logical reasons not to. I didn't have food. I didn't know if she was feral or sick or belonged to someone. I had no idea how long she'd been in that barn or if she was safe there. I wasn't even sure I was safe. But logic had stopped being useful to me a long time ago. So I walked back through the misty field, hands in my coat pockets, shoes wet with dew, and pushed open the barn door again. She was there, same spot, same pile of old blankets. This time she lifted her head when she saw me. Then, and I swear this happened, she blinked, yawned, and got up to walk toward me, like she'd been waiting. Over the next few days, a kind of rhythm formed. I'd wake early, shake off the stiffness of sleeping in my car, and walk across the field. Sometimes the sky was still dark. Sometimes the frost on the grass crunched beneath my boots. Always, the barn was still, and she was there. She never greeted me with sounds, no meows, no chirps, just presence, steady, watchful. Sometimes she stayed near her blankets, flicking her tail like a metronome. Sometimes she curled up next to the rusted milk crate and watched me explore the barn. Once, she followed me silently as I paced the far side of the space, sniffing old bits of rope, reading the fading chalk notes scribbled onto the walls. Feed mill pickup, August 14th. Vet, 10 a.m., Tuesday. The past was written in layers here, not loud, just there, like someone had left in a hurry and meant to come back, but never did. One afternoon, I brought food. I stopped at a gas station on my way back from a nearby town and picked up a few things: bottled water, a sandwich, a warm pair of socks, and a can of wet cat food with a picture of a salmon on the label. It felt silly, but necessary. When I opened the can inside the barn, she didn't bolt. She didn't rush either. She just walked up, slow and steady, and sat down 3 feet from me. Watched as I peeled back the lid. Her eyes didn't blink. Her tail curled around her paws. I set the can down between us. She waited. I turned away, pretending to examine something on the far wall. I gave her space. Time. I'd learned by now that she didn't respond to coaxing. Just quiet. When I looked back, she was eating. Not frantically, but gratefully. Like she'd done this before. That was the moment I knew. She wasn't completely wild. Someone had fed her once, held her, let her in, and then stopped. I started talking to her. Not long conversations, nothing performative, just little things. Your ear has a nick in it. What happened there? You like salmon, huh? I don't. I tried it once in college, threw up on my roommate's shoes. Is this where you sleep every night? I miss him, but I don't miss how small I became around him. She never responded, obviously, but I swear she listened. I named her on the 5th day, out loud, just once. Juniper. I didn't know why. It just fit, strong, software a little wild. She didn't flinch at the name, didn't react. But when I said it, something settled in my chest. Something that had been unmoored for months. It was around that time that she started following me. Not always, not far. Just small, deliberate steps behind me as I moved around the barn. If I left for the car, she stayed, but if I sat down, she came close, curled her tail near my feet. Once, she touched her nose to my wrist, just once. The first time she slept next to me, really next to me, it was raining. A light, tapping rain on the metal roof. I was wrapped in a borrowed sleeping bag I'd gotten from the town's thrift store, lying on the barn floor beside the old feed bench. I'd told myself I'd leave the next morning, but I didn't want to yet. And that night, Juniper curled beside my ribs, no noise, no drama, just warmth. Her fur smelled like hay and cedar and a little bit of dust. Her breathing was slow. And for the first time in nearly a year, I slept without waking once. It had been 11 months since the miscarriage, 9 since he left, 3 since I'd quit my job, 1 since the paperwork arrived. I hadn't cried in front of another living being in almost as long. But the day Juniper rested her paw lightly on my chest while I lay staring at the rafters, something broke. The tears came quiet, no heaving, just salt and surrender. And she didn't move. She stayed. And I remember thinking, not even in words, just in feeling, please don't stop staying. The days bled together after that. I began leaving the barn to find food, to walk along the country roads, to watch the river in the next town over. But I always came back, every single night. Juniper was always there. One morning, I noticed she'd begun doing something new. She'd lead me, not far, just around the barn, or to the low part of the field behind it, where wildflowers grew in patches and old wheelbarrows rusted half-buried in the earth. She'd walk a few feet ahead, glance over her shoulder, and pause until I caught up. Once, she led me to a tree stump, scratched at it with her claws, sat atop it like a queen. It felt like she was showing me pieces of her world, letting me in. I still didn't know what I was doing, where I'd go, whether I'd return to the city, whether I even had anything to return to. But the barn had become something to me, a place between what I'd lost and whatever was next, and Juniper was the bridge. Not loud, not obvious, just there, steady as the turning leaves. Then something changed. It started small. One morning, Juniper didn't meet me at the door. She was inside but distant, sitting near the far wall, her body tense, eyes trained on something I couldn't see. When I stepped closer, she stood, not to come to me, but to block me. She didn't growl, just positioned herself between me and a spot along the back wall near the floorboards. Her tail flicked, low and fast. Something was different, something unsettled. And as I knelt down slowly, heart skipping a beat, Juniper let out a soft, low sound I'd never heard from her before. Not fear, not warning. Something else, something almost like memory. And I realized I hadn't been the only one grieving. It started with her eyes. That morning, they weren't steady. They were scanning, like she knew something I didn't and wished I wouldn't find out. The third Sunday I spent in the barn started like the others. Low fog in the field, the cold smell of wet leaves, my boots kicking up frost as I made my way from the car to the barn, hands curled deep in my coat pockets. I was humming something, a song I hadn't listened to in years, but that always came back when I was in quiet places, James Taylor. Maybe. I hadn't told anyone where I was. I hadn't answered my sister's last voicemail, hadn't returned my boss's polite but clipped email about whether I'd be extending my leave or if this was more permanent. There was something seductive about falling off the map, not disappearing exactly, just floating. And Juniper, that quiet little cat with the storm-colored fur and eyes like old glass, had become my anchor. She didn't ask anything of me. She just noticed, accepted. But that morning, she was different. Usually when I opened the barn door, she was there, sitting just left of center, her body still but alert. Sometimes she'd be stretched out in a beam of sun, sometimes crouched near her nest of old fabric, half-lidded and dozing. But that day, she wasn't in her usual place. The door creaked louder than normal as I pushed it open. The air inside was damp and still, no birds, no rustle. And then I saw her, in the far back corner, body low, eyes locked on something I couldn't see. "Juniper?" I said softly. No reaction, no tail flick, no shift in posture, just locked stillness. I stepped forward slowly. The air in the barn felt different, heavier, like something had changed while I was gone, even though I'd only left the night before. Juniper turned her head, slowly, and looked at me. That was when I noticed it. Her ears were back, not flattened, not aggressive, just angled in a way I hadn't seen from her before. Cautious, on edge. And then, without sound, she padded toward me, curved around behind my legs, and sat directly in front of me. Not facing me, facing the back wall. I followed her gaze. It was subtle. Almost nothing. Just a patch of wall near the baseboard where the wood was warped, bowed outward slightly, like water had gotten in behind it and made the boards swell. But Juniper was staring at it, like it was alive, like it was wrong. Over the next 2 days, I watched her closely. She kept returning to that same spot, always the same posture, low to the ground, ears turned, eyes narrowed. Once, I saw her paw at it, not scratching, just touching it, gently, with the pads of her foot, as if checking for a pulse. Something was there, or had been. I crouched beside her once, pressed my palm to the wood. It was colder than the rest of the barn, almost damp. I asked her, "What is it?" She didn't look away. That night, I didn't sleep well. I lay awake in the back seat of the car, listening to the wind, thinking about that wall. My breath fogged the windows. I'd stopped using the sleeping bag. The barn had started to feel more like home than the car did. But something had kept me from staying inside that night. Some part of me was afraid, not of the barn, not of the dark, but of what I might be starting to remember. In the morning, I brought tools, not intentionally, just a small pry bar and a flashlight I found in the trunk, left over from the house we sold. My hands shook a little as I carried them across the field, like I was walking into a memory I hadn't agreed to yet. Juniper was waiting at the door. She didn't greet me. She didn't purr. Just turned and walked ahead of me, slow and silent, toward the wall, like she knew I was ready now. The boards weren't nailed down firmly, just swollen and warped. It took almost no force to wedge the bar between the slats and pull. The first one came loose with a quiet snap. Behind it, only darkness. Juniper didn't move. She sat to the side, her eyes trained on me, but her body still. I pried a second board free, then a third. The gap was wide enough to see inside, and that's when I understood why Juniper had been watching. There was no body, no bones, nothing dramatic, just a small, folded wool blanket. Dust-covered, mold-streaked, faded maroon, and on top of it, a child's shoe, tiny, canvas, red, with a white rubber toe and a frayed lace. I stared at it for a long time, then reached in, slowly, and pulled it out. The fabric crumbled slightly in my hands. I didn't know what I was feeling, just that my chest ached. Juniper didn't move, not until I set the shoe gently on the ground beside me. Then she stood, walked over, and sat down next to it. Her tail curled toward the shoe, just touched it, like a gesture, a kind of knowing. I sat on the barn floor until the light started to shift and the shadows grew long. I didn't speak. Neither did she. But the silence between us had weight now. History. Like something had been named, even if we didn't yet know what it meant. That night, the dreams returned. Not vivid ones, just flashes. A blue hospital gown, the sound of a monitor beeping, the weight of nothing in my arms, and a single word whispered over and over again. Almost. The next day, I brought the shoe with me. I wrapped it in an old scarf and carried it across the field like something sacred. I didn't know what to do with it. I only knew I couldn't leave it there. Not hidden, not forgotten. I placed it on the windowsill inside the barn, the one that caught the morning sun. Juniper jumped up next to it and sat beside it for hours. That afternoon, I heard her make a noise I'd never heard before. A soft, almost breathless chirp. It wasn't for me. She was looking at the shoe. I started asking around the town. Not much, just small conversations with the woman who ran the grocery store, the man who managed the feed supply shop. I didn't ask about the barn, just mentioned the area, the field, the road. It was the librarian, eventually, who said something. "That old Henderson property?" she asked, her brows raised. "Haven't thought about that place in years. Sad story." I waited. Used to be a family there, couple and their daughter. Then one year they just left. No one really knew why. House was torn down decades ago. Barn's all that's left. Some folks say they lost the girl in an accident. Others say they moved away after the father died. No one's sure what's true anymore. She shrugged, smiled softly. Old stories. They get tangled. That night, Juniper curled into my lap. Her body was warm, heavier than I remembered. I rested my hand on her back and felt her ribs rise and fall beneath the soft weight of her fur. Something passed between us then. Not a thought, not an emotion, just shared presence. Two creatures who had both lost something they didn't know how to carry. I think I started to cry. Not loudly, not even with tears. Just a slow collapse inside of walls I hadn't realized were still standing. Juniper lifted her head, placed one paw on my chest again, just like she had the night I first broke open, but this time she stayed like that. For minutes. Long enough for my breathing to slow, long enough for me to feel in some deep, unspoken place that I wasn't alone anymore. I didn't need to know exactly what happened in that barn. I didn't need to explain the shoe or the blanket or why Juniper had been drawn there. Some truths don't arrive in words. They arrive in presence, in stillness, in breath, in the soft press of a paw to your chest when your heart is trying to remember how to beat. And somehow, in all that silence, something new began. A small, almost imperceptible return. Not to who I was, but to someone I might still become. Grief doesn't always scream. Sometimes it curls up next to you and watches. Sometimes it hides behind wood, behind walls, behind years. But eventually, if you stay still long enough, it finds its way through. The shoe stayed on the windowsill. No one touched it. Not me, not Juniper. It just sat there, catching light through cracked glass, collecting dust like the rest of this place. But somehow it looked newer than it should have, like time had been paused on it, like someone was still waiting for the person who'd worn it to come back for it. Sometimes I'd stare at it while I sat in the barn with Juniper pressed against my side, and the air would shift in that way it does when memory sneaks up on you, the kind of quiet that carries a shape. Not soundless, but held, like breath before a sob. I still hadn't told anyone I was here. My phone stayed off. I barely checked it anymore. My sister's last text just said, "Are you okay?" I hadn't answered, mostly because I didn't know, but also because this place was doing something to me, slowing me down, making me feel things I hadn't let myself feel in months. And Juniper, silent, watchful Juniper, was leading me straight into it. The wall where we'd found the shoe stayed open. I didn't cover it back up. I couldn't. It felt wrong to pretend it wasn't there. Juniper would sit near it some evenings, not as tense as before, just present, almost like she was keeping vigil. There was something reverent about her stillness. She wasn't guarding the spot anymore. She was acknowledging it. So was I. It had been almost a month since I arrived. Late October was folding into early November. The leaves had mostly fallen now. Wind came through the fields stronger. I layered sweaters under my coat. I brought candles into the barn, little ones in jam jars, just to warm the air with light. It helped. Juniper didn't like the flame at first. She stayed distant, eyes alert. But eventually, she crept close, curled up beside one, and blinked slowly at me. That quiet, feline kiss of trust. And for the first time since I'd lost the baby, since he left, since I quit, since I ran, I felt okay being seen. It happened on a Tuesday. Mid-morning, sky flat with cloud, the air heavy with that November stillness, right before the first real freeze. I'd come back from a walk down the road. I was learning the land by now. The paths, the way the ground dipped near the fence line, the way the barn creaked differently when the wind came from the west. When I pushed open the barn door, something felt off. Juniper wasn't there. I called softly. "Juniper?" No answer. Not even a shadow moving behind the feed crates. That had never happened before. I set down the thermos I was carrying and stepped in. "Junie?" Still nothing. Panic didn't come all at once. It rose slowly, like water in the throat. I scanned the usual corners, nest, milk crate, rafters. And then I saw the shift. One of the floorboards, just behind the open wall, was crooked, just slightly, but enough. I crouched. The board wasn't nailed in. I pulled it up gently. Beneath it was a crawl space, shallow, narrow, maybe 3 feet deep, dry earth and blackness, and 2 green eyes staring back at me. Juniper was crouched beneath the floor, not hiding exactly, but waiting. She didn't look scared. She looked like she was leading me again. Slowly, I reached down. My hand shook. She didn't move away. I pulled the board farther aside and shined my phone light into the space. That's when I saw it. Another blanket. A second shoe, this one smaller, white, the rubber toe dirt-streaked. And a photograph, just lying there, face down in the dirt. I reached in, heart thudding in my ribs, and slid it out. The photo was worn soft at the edges, the ink faded. It showed a little girl, maybe 5, standing in front of the barn. This barn, wearing red boots, smiling big, and next to her, crouched low with an arm slung around her shoulder, was a woman. Eyes like mine, the kind of smile that took effort, like joy had once been easy for her. But lately, it hadn't been. I sat down hard on the barn floor. Dust rose around me. Juniper climbed out of the crawl space, light-footed, and curled into my lap. And I let go. Not a breakdown, not a sobbing collapse, just a slow, steady fall inward. I remembered the hospital, the sterile brightness, the way they whispered in the hallway. I remembered holding her for 1 minute. 60 seconds, her weight like air wrapped in skin. I remembered thinking I should be crying, but I couldn't. Not yet. I remembered how he looked at me when I told him I wanted to name her, and how he left 3 weeks later. I didn't forget her, I whispered to Juniper, who was pressing her chin against my thigh. I just buried her inside me, and I couldn't find her again. The wind pressed through the slats. Juniper didn't move. It hit me then, why she'd led me to the barn, why she'd pawed the floor, why she watched that wall for days, why she waited. She hadn't just been trying to show me what was hidden here. She'd been waiting for me to be ready to see it, to see her, to see me. Somewhere in this barn, a little girl had once laughed. Somewhere in me, one had once lived too. They were both still here, just waiting to be named. That night, I built a small fire just outside the barn, near the tree stump where Juniper had once led me weeks earlier. I wrapped the 2 shoes in clean fabric. I placed the photograph between them, and I whispered a name I hadn't said in nearly a year. Maeve. The fire took slow. Juniper sat beside me, silent, tail curled neatly around her feet. I didn't cry, not yet, but something inside me, something long shut and deeply quiet, softened. And for the first time since the loss, since the leaving, since everything, I said goodbye. Not to Maeve, but to the version of myself who thought I had to carry it all alone. Juniper climbed into my lap after the last flame went out. She smelled like cedar and soot, and I swear, I felt her heart beat against mine. Grief changes shape, not all at once, not loudly. Sometimes it just steps slightly to the side and lets in a little more light than it did the day before. The first thing she noticed was how quiet the barn felt. Not silent, not empty, just quieter in a way that didn't ache. The floor didn't creak the same under her boots. The air smelled different too. There was still dust, still old hay, still the faint scent of damp wood from where the barn leaned against the season's cold. But underneath that, there was something newer, a kind of stillness that didn't feel like mourning anymore. It felt like memory. The fire had gone out clean. That night, after she let the last ember fade, she and Juniper stayed outside longer than usual. The stars were pale and wide above them. The air smelled like cedar smoke and frozen grass. She wrapped the scarf tighter around her neck, but didn't go back to the car. Instead, she opened the barn door and let the cold follow them in. Juniper trotted ahead of her and curled into the nest she'd made weeks ago. A circle of worn blankets and a thrifted pillow that had lost most of its stuffing. The cat didn't even look back. She just blinked once, slow, and tucked her chin under her paw. So the woman sat down, back against the wall, knees bent, arms folded. And she breathed. Not because she was calm, not because it was over, but because for the first time in what felt like a year, she could. The next morning, she woke to find Juniper sleeping on her chest. Not beside her, on her. Her small body pressed directly over the place where all the worst feelings had lived. It was the first time the cat had slept that way. It was also the first time the woman didn't wake with that deep pit in her chest, the one that always opened just before sunrise. Instead, she just lay there, still, breathing under the weight of a creature who had chosen her. And for a few long minutes, she didn't feel broken. She just felt here. She stopped counting the days. At some point, it no longer mattered how long she'd been gone. The calendar had lost its grip. What mattered was that she kept showing up, to the barn, to the quiet, to herself. Each day she did something small. She swept, rearranged the feed crates, repaired a loose board, replaced a pane of glass, She even found an old radio in the trunk of the car and brought it inside. It only picked up one station, some local thing that played soft jazz and old folk songs. But it filled the air in a way that felt alive. Juniper didn't mind it. She would sit near the speaker and tilt her head when the guitar came in. There was one song in particular, Nick Drake, Place to Be, that made the woman stop whatever she was doing every time. It was quiet and sad and beautiful in that way things are when they're true. And one day, as it played through the dust and light of the barn, the woman whispered, "I think I know who I am again." She didn't say it to Juniper, but the cat lifted her head just slightly, as if she'd heard. Food ran low by the second week of November. She hadn't realized how little she'd packed, or how little she'd cared, but now, something had shifted. She didn't just want to survive the days, she wanted to live them. So she drove into town, not just to the gas station or the 24-hour grocer, but into the actual heart of it. Past the post office and the coffee shop, past the old train depot, right into the small cluster of storefronts where people still hung up signs by hand and waved to each other across the street. She didn't bring the photo, or the shoes, or any part of the past she'd uncovered in the barn, but she brought herself, fully, and that was enough. She bought dry cat food, tuna, a wool blanket from a secondhand shop, 2 candles, a bag of real coffee, and, after staring at it for 10 minutes, a used typewriter. The clerk asked if she was a writer. She said, "I don't know yet," but she smiled when she said it. When she got back to the barn, Juniper was waiting at the door again. The cat didn't move to greet her. She hadn't in a while. Instead, she just watched. Calm. Certain. The way cats do when they already know how the day will unfold. The woman unpacked the groceries, laid the new blanket in the corner, filled the little bowl with dry food, and finally, brewed herself a cup of real coffee. Juniper curled on the blanket, not on her lap, not by the door, just present, no tension, no distance, just there. And the woman sat beside her and wrote. The words didn't come easy. They hadn't for a long time. There had been a time, long ago, before the hospital, before the leaving, when writing had felt like breath. Now it felt like reaching into fog. But still she typed, one letter at a time, not a novel, not a memoir, just notes, fragments, pieces of herself, set down without judgment. Maeve was not a mistake. I was not a failure. Grief is not a punishment. It's a language I'm still learning to speak. Juniper would lift her head at the sound of each new line. The clicking of keys had become their new music. One night, a storm rolled in, the kind with deep thunder that shakes the floorboards and makes the world feel like it's shifting. The woman had just lit a candle when the first boom hit. Juniper jumped, then ran straight to her, leaping into her lap in a way she hadn't done since the first week. She curled into a ball so tight it was hard to tell where the cat ended and the woman began. They stayed like that until the rain passed, and when it did, when the wind finally let go, the woman whispered, "You saved me, you know." Juniper didn't react. She didn't need to. By the third week, the barn felt different. Not finished, not fixed, just real. It had become something more than shelter. It had become something more than grief. It had become the in-between, between what she'd lost and what she might still find. And Juniper had become more than a cat. Not in any magical way. Just in the way that happens when another living thing sits beside you long enough, quietly enough, to help you carry something you didn't think could be carried. Some mornings, Juniper didn't follow her around like she used to. Some mornings, she'd sit outside on the stump, watching the field, like she was saying, "You don't need me as much now." And maybe she didn't. Not in the same way, but she still left the barn door open, just in case. The woman no longer slept in the car. She no longer avoided mirrors. She no longer flinched when she saw children's shoes. And one afternoon, standing in the soft light of late November, she picked up the photo again. She looked at the woman in it, the mother beside the little girl in red boots. And this time, she didn't see a stranger. She saw someone like her, someone who had loved and lost and stayed, someone who, for reasons no one would ever fully understand, had become part of this place, part of its breath, its silence, its memory, just like she had. That night, she whispered Maeve's name again. No grief, no collapse, just a mother remembering. Not every ending arrives in a bang. Sometimes it's a small gesture, so quiet you almost miss it. And then you realize it changes everything. Early morning light filtered through the barn's slatted walls, painting long stripes across the dusty floor. The air held that sharp clarity that only comes just before sunrise in late November, cool and still, but full of promise. A low mist hovered in the field beyond, curling around the fence posts like soft smoke. Inside, Juniper stirred. She stretched out beside the nest of blankets, her paws flexing in slow motion. The woman woke too, sensing the arrival of something she couldn't yet name. She sat up, brushing wild strands of hair from her face, and reached for the mug of lukewarm coffee still warm from the night before. Juniper let out a gentle rattle, a sound between a purr and a hum, and stepped forward. She met the woman where she sat, then nudged her hand with her head. A request or a nudge? Something more than just physical contact. It carried intention. The woman put aside the coffee, stood, and watched as Juniper padded ahead, toward the low-lit corner of the barn where the woman had first uncovered the child's shoe and photograph. A place heavy with history. A place that had pulled them both through grief. Juniper went there often now, curled beside the photograph, but never disturbed it. But today, she stood and circled. When the woman knelt down, Juniper stepped aside and tapped a paw at something. The woman followed the line of Juniper's motion and saw it. Tucked behind the faded photo, almost invisible, was a small, weathered leather pouch, no bigger than a fist, thin and cracked, tied with a faded ribbon. The woman's heart thudded. She'd never seen it before. How could she? Nothing had been behind the photograph, or so she remembered. She inhaled slowly and reached for the pouch. Juniper sat just behind her, tail flicking softly, as though reminding her to be gentle. She untied the ribbon, careful with her trembling fingers. When she opened it, the leather crackled, dry with age. Inside were three things: a small silver locket, too tiny for a woman, even a mother, in the shape of a heart. A pressed wildflower, golden brown and fragile. A folded slip of yellowing paper with neat handwriting. Her breath caught in her throat. She held each item with reverence, as though afraid to disturb what they carried. Juniper pressed against her legs again, leaning into her, grounding her. She opened the locket. Inside was a faded photograph of the little girl, the one in the red boots, curling with the same woman from before. The mother, the child, the love, still frozen in that tiny frame. Her tears came quietly, hot and slow. As she sat there, Juniper climbed into her lap and draped a paw across the woman's wrist. The gesture took her entirely by surprise, a cat's paw on her wrist, steady as a heartbeat. It felt like a blessing, a bridge, a wordless ceremony. The woman closed the locket and turned to the paper. She carefully unfolded it. The handwriting was graceful, slanted. The words read, "Maeve, you are the light in the dark. I hope this finds you one day when you need to remember. All my love, always Eliza." Her chest tightened. Maeve, the girl's name, the mother's name. She pressed a hand to her chest, over the place where grief had lived so heavily. "Eliza," she said aloud for the first time. "You did love her." Juniper purred and nudged the locket closer, a quiet offering. The woman held the locket to her heart. She breathed. Time moved strangely after that moment, like everything slowed down enough to feel sacred. She didn't leave the barn that day. Instead, she sat in the golden light, notebook open across her lap, locket in one hand, pen in the other. She wrote, "I found love. Not the kind that flies away when life gets hard, but the kind you find in small bindings, a cat's paw on your wrist, a letter left behind, a photograph in a dusty barn. I found myself again." Juniper settled beside her, the locket in plain view. She blinked slowly, looked around the barn, watchful, steady, like she was satisfied, like she'd been waiting for this too. The woman paused her writing and set the locket on the photograph. The two sat together in dusty quiet, an image and a token, held together by shared loss and memory. She realized she didn't need to carry everything on her own anymore. Not grief, not love, not memory. The barn was her archive, Juniper, her guide, the words in her notebook, her offering to the world. Sunlight shifted to afternoon. The barn's silence grew deeper, no longer empty, but resonant. Everything that had been locked away, loss, love, presence, was now present. Eventually, she packed up the items carefully. Placing the locket and letter inside her coat, she folded the flower in tissue paper and slipped it into her backpack. The photograph she left in its place, safe next to the spot where Juniper often sat. Juniper followed her to the door that evening. The woman looked down at her cat and gently said, "Want to go home?" The cat blinked once. Gray eyes so familiar. She slipped beside her, not running, not rushing, a slow step forward. They left the barn together at dusk. The woman carried the pouch and photograph. Juniper carried howling absence into a new kind of presence. When she reached the car, the woman climbed in. Juniper jumped onto the passenger seat and settled beside her. The steering wheel in her hands felt different now, steady, warm, full of intention. She drove out of the field slowly, crunching leaves under the tires. That night, she placed the locket and letter on the bedside table. Juniper slept by her feet again. The next morning, the woman brewed coffee, lit a candle, and wrote another line in her notebook. "We all carry our own barns inside us." She didn't go back right away. She let the farm and the barn be when she needed to. But within days, she returned. Not because she had to, because she wanted to. The final gift, the reveal, had taught her something simple. Healing lives in shared stories. The cat didn't need fanfare. The woman didn't need a new identity. The locket didn't need explanation. Together, they needed to carry what had been uncovered. Juniper greeted her at the door without needing to say anything, a cursor of welcome. They walked inside. The barn welcomed them back, still. The photograph waited. She cleaned up. She lit the radio. She started arranging items on the empty floorboards, thrifted jars, soft blankets, the photograph near it, the flower, a candle. Juniper walked past, pawed once at the photograph, then curled in a beam of light. The woman stepped back and looked at what she'd made. An altar of memory, a place of presence, a testament to all that had been here and all that still could be. In that moment, she made a choice. She would tell Maeve's story, Eliza's letter, the lost barn, the silent cat who guided her home. She'd write it, share it. Let the small, potent truth rise into the world. That healing doesn't always shout. Sometimes it arrives in a cat's slow blink, a handwritten note hidden in wood, a flower left behind. And it's enough. Juniper stretched and hopped down, walked out through the barn door, stayed just long enough to look back at the woman, tail flicked, eyes steady. She was saying, "This is just the beginning." And as the woman stepped into gray dusk, notebook in hand, she realized it was true. What they found inside that barn was human, beautifully, fragile, and unbreakable enough to carry forward. You never know who will carry you back to yourself. A cat, a letter, a child's forgotten shoe. The important thing is, someone always does. Eventually, quietly, when you're ready. Weeks had passed since she left the barn, not abandoned it, not escaped it, just moved forward. The land was changing again. Late autumn stretched thin into early winter. The fields, once golden, had turned a hushed gray. Frost came now in the mornings, delicate and persistent, tracing lace across her windshield, her fingertips, even her thoughts. But the cold didn't reach the place inside her that had reopened. That part stayed warm, quiet, awake, like Juniper's body had been, curled across her chest the morning after the fire, like the photograph felt in her hands that final day, like Maeve's name felt now, not like a wound but a rhythm. She visited the barn once a week now, no rituals, no journaling marathons, just presence. Juniper still lived there mostly, but sometimes she followed the woman home. Not always, not predictably. She'd appear in the passenger seat, sit like a passenger, silent and proud, spend a night, leave again. She was still wild, still independent, but she was also, unmistakably, hers now. Not owned, bonded. And the woman had grown used to her absence, not because she didn't miss her, but because she trusted she'd come back. That's what love becomes after grief has shaped it. Not need, but return. She had sent a photo of the barn to her sister, and then called her, finally. They didn't talk about everything, not all at once, but they started. She told her about the field, about Juniper, about the locket. Her sister cried quietly on the other end and said, "You sound like you again." And she smiled, because she didn't feel like the old version of herself. She felt like someone new, with the same name, same scars, but a different center, a steadier one. The typewriter became part of her mornings. She didn't write a book, she wrote letters, one to Maeve, one to herself from 6 months ago, one to Eliza. She didn't mail them. She folded them into clean envelopes and left them tucked inside the pouch, placed near the original letter from the barn. Some stories don't need to be shared with the world. Some just need to be witnessed. One afternoon, as snow began to fall for the first time, she returned to the barn carrying a box. It wasn't heavy, just full. Inside, the photo, the pouch, a red pair of children's boots she'd found at a thrift shop, a copy of the journal pages she'd written, one of Juniper's toys. She arranged them in the loft of the barn, not like a shrine, but like a room. A small, sacred space. A place that would hold memory gently and allow the next person who came to feel less alone. She didn't want to seal the story shut. She wanted to keep the door open, because what she'd learned most was this: grief is not a wall, it's a hallway. And if you let yourself walk down it, slowly, painfully, honestly, you'll find a door at the end. And beyond it, something wild and waiting. Maybe not a cat, maybe not a barn, maybe not even answers, but always, always, something worth stepping into. Juniper brushed against her legs before hopping into the loft. She sat beside the box, tail curled around her body, and blinked once. Approval, closure, permission. The woman crouched beside her. She whispered, "Thank you." Juniper didn't purr, didn't meow. She just stayed, present, whole. She took a final photo, not for Instagram, just for herself. A memory of the space that had cracked her wide open and helped her rebuild. Then she turned off the light. Closed the barn door, not forever, just for now. The story didn't end in a headline. No one went viral. There were no miracle reunions. Just this: a woman, a cat, a barn, 3 lives braided by loss, silence, presence. And maybe that's the whole point. We're all walking through our own barns, through hollow spaces, through past versions of ourselves, waiting for something or someone to guide us. Sometimes that guide shows up in fur. Sometimes she shows up in the sound of a typewriter key. Sometimes in a letter hidden beneath the floorboards of your grief. If this story found you today, maybe that's not an accident. Maybe you're walking through your own quiet place. And maybe now you'll know you don't have to walk it alone. If this story stayed with you, let it keep moving. Subscribe for more real human stories like this one. Comment below. Tell us who your Juniper was, or is. Press the bell icon to follow our journey. We share new stories every day that help us all remember what it means to feel. And most of all, thank you for being here. We'll leave the barn door open for you, always.